Chief, is there anything that you went over several things here, but what would you say is the main thing that you would not do again?
The main thing would be not to wait that amount of time. We need to act on the probable cause that we have, and I'll tell you, those officers' intentions were honorable. They believed that distribution was going on in that home, and we just simply waited too long. Had they entered, I think we'd on the day that we received the warrant, I think we'd have had a completely different outcome.
Is there any disciplinary action against any officer due to this situation?
I anticipate the officer, based on what I know right now, like I told you, it's still in progress, but the officer giving the misinformation to the citizen is going to be reprimanded. Yes, ma'am.
Before this warrant, how long did you, or before the change, how long did you have to carry out a warrant?
The state of Missouri allows 10 days, so you can wait up to 10, and in this case, we waited 8. Yes, sir.
Not in this incident, but have you ever used this kind of entry on a misdemeanor related offense?
Not knowing.
Stated on the police report itself?
That's a good question, not knowingly. Occasionally, we will have information that we're going in for a felony or a serious offense, and then the result is that the arrest is made for a misdemeanor because there's not a felony amount there.
But at any point, do they get a warrant on a misdemeanor?
Insert dynamically, no.
How can you call it a good investigation when you, in fact, didn't even know there were animals in the house?
No, but were you here for the whole conference? We admit that. We didn't know there were animals in the house. We didn't have the house under surveillance.
Turned right around in the end and said that you had good investigation, but the only reason that you didn't get what you claimed was because you waited.
That's correct.
So, not knowing what all's in the house to encounter is good investigation.
Yeah, I think we're just missing each other here. The night, if we had served the warrant the day we had the investigation, the outcome would have been much different. Whether the dogs were there or not, we weren't really looking into that, or whether there were children present prior to that. We are now.
So, like, where was the garage area of the house located in relationship to the kitchen area?
Okay, I wasn't at the warrant service, so I can't really answer that question for you.
Yeah, you're just saying that, you know, there was no one near the area, but what about the area on the other end? I mean, just because they were in the other side of the house, because they not have been in the garage? I don't know where that, I've never seen.
If I think where you're going with this is, do we know where everybody was in the house before we went in? No, that's impossible. You would have to have observation through every window of the house. That's not practical.
What kind of ammunition do they use? Do they use, you know, I forget the kind of bullets designed not to go through walls? I mean, a lot of the military assault teams uses, they're made, I mean, they're lethal bullets, but they're like Teflon coated birdshot. They're designed not to go through the drywall of the structure itself.
I'd be happy to answer those questions for you at another time. What I'd like to do is focus on what I've talked about here, and I believe you had a question.
I know you keep saying that if you would have served the warrant immediately, the outcome would have been different, but how can you prove that?
Well, I don't know that there's any proof of it other than what the confidential informant was used, said that they saw in the house. You know, that's information that we had that made us believe that there was a felony amount of marijuana in the house. So, you know, I'm just telling you we had that information. Once we ran the warrant, there was also evidence in the house that there was drug trafficking going on. So, the fact that there was none there just means they were out of stock, I guess.
What was that evidence that indicated that there was drug trafficking?
Well, information that we received ahead of time that there were duffel bags in the attic. And we found the duffel bags and they reeked of marijuana, but there was no marijuana in them. And then the safe that was recovered in the house also reeked of unburned marijuana. So it was the officer's opinion that there had, at least at one time, been large amounts of marijuana in the house, which tended to support what our confidential informant told us. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, are sensory observations legitimate in court, or is that just?
Oh, yes. That, in fact, a lot of times the smell of marijuana at when you roll your window down at a traffic stop, obviously the officer can detect marijuana, and through their training can detect marijuana or illegal substance being used in the car. Yes, that can be established. That can establish probable cause.
And was that the only? I think what was the question again originally about what was the evidence that talked to you?
The evidence of trafficking.
Evidence of trafficking, yes.
Is that the only evidence that you have from that trafficking agent?
I guess I'm missing the question.
Was that the only evidence in answer to his question? Was that all you had that was after the investigation?
And then what the informant saw when they were actually in the house, coupled with that, what we found.
There's nothing that you produced.
I guess I'm not following your question. Okay.
Chief, you mentioned your, oh, go ahead.
If the February 11th incident never had happened, do you feel that you would still be making these changes to this policy?
No, because I wouldn't have known about it. Probably we would have gone on serving these warrants until something like this happened and it came to my attention. It is not something that was on my radar. And I want to emphasize that, you know, these officers weren't doing anything wrong. This was a practice that had been in place several years. And like I closed, I said, you know, sometimes things happen and that gives you the impetus for change. And that's one of the things I think that we've benefited from here.
Chief, you mentioned that you're going to get more helmet cameras. How many more cameras are you going to purchase, and do you know the cost of those yet? And when will they be implemented?
Tom can answer that question for you. He's researching that right now.
I believe we're going to purchase 8 cameras. They are digital cameras that are store the digital information on the chip. The ones we're looking at right now cost a little over $300 each.
Yes, ma'am.
You said that you knew that there was a child present before. What is the protocol, or did it change now, of shooting before you know the location of the
Right.
child?
Well, the protocol now is that we have to take the presence of that child into consideration. That was not considered something that would prevent us from taking or using a dynamic entry in the past. It is now. I feel it's something that we have to consider. I've discussed it with Tom and the staff, and we realize that, you know, those are the kinds of things that we're going to have to take into consideration before we do a dynamic entry. We've learned some lessons here, folks, and that's what we're trying to tell you today. Yes,
I
ma'am.
have 2 questions for you, Chief. The first is on the 8 hours. I understand that our SWAT officers are have regular duty, and then are brought together as a team for dynamic entries after often a full shift. Is 8 hours really enough for them to have rest and be ready for something as stressful as a dynamic entry? Or would 24 hours not perhaps be a better solution?
Okay. 24 hours was actually considered, but I think there may be some confusion there in that it's not necessarily that the officers we're going to wait 8 hours so they can rest. We have officers that are tactically trained shotgun throughout the department. So we will gather an entry team, and we'll gather officers that are not just getting off work. That's the whole point. I think that there was consideration made for how much overtime it was going to cost, and those kinds of things. People trying to do the right things, but you know, we lose the benefit of having a warrant like this run promptly when we wait too long. The 8-hour window that I chose is primarily so that if we get a warrant at 10 o'clock at night, we're not running at midnight. That gives the officer till 8 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning to run that warrant. Generally, we want them run as soon as possible, and it has to be at a reasonable hour.
And the second question is sort of from what I've heard from you, and this is an interpretation, so I'd
Okay.
like your confirmation as to
Okay.
how accurate that is. I'm hearing you say that you have concluded that it is appropriate to use dynamic entry when the primary concern is loss of evidence as opposed to imminent danger to the public or to officers.
Yes, but it'll be weighed with the, it'll be weighed based on the risk to human life, that of the officers, that of the suspects, that of innocent bystanders. If you're asking me if this warrant would have been run tomorrow, I'm telling you it wouldn't. The standard is much higher, and it has to be. I don't think that we can send the message to people who engage in the narcotics trade that we're out of business, because we're not. We're bound by law to enforce the laws. And so when we have to make one of these entries, what we're doing is raising the bar for what we will consider before we go in. And I will tell you very frankly that we're going to be looking at every possible thing that could go wrong. We'd be very foolish not to.
And is that criteria summarized in the information you said you'd make available on the way out?
It is, but a lot of it is, like I just told you, I don't want, people who engage in illegal activity in the city of Columbia should expect to be arrested. So I'm not going to say that we're not going to arrest people for narcotics. In
But the
fact, quite
question
the
isn't
opposite.
about arrest, of course, it's about dynamic entry, isn't it?
That's correct. And we're going to use alternatives to dynamic entry. And we'll still make those searches. We'll do it in what I would consider a safer and more prudent manner when we detect that there are children present or even with animals present. There's nothing that says we have to run a dynamic entry. And we're taking the approach that if it's not worth it, and let me